Hello, and welcome to Ending Physician Overwhelm. I'm your host, Dr. Megan Mello. I'm a family and obesity medicine physician, as well as a certified life coach for physicians. In this podcast, we talk about how the learned habits of people-pleasing, perfectionism, and a lack of boundaries show up in our lives and how they contribute to burnout, exhaustion, and overwhelm. The healthcare system is broken, my friends, but let's not wait for it to be fixed in order to feel better. All right, now, without overthinking this, tell me what your number one fantasy is regarding work. Now, we're going to keep this non-sexual. This is not that kind of show. But without overthinking, and I know I'm asking a lot there, what is your number one fantasy about your current work environment? For so many people that I talk to, for so many employed physicians, it is quitting your job. And I've been thinking about it this week, and actually, probably today, because I didn't actually keep track of what day I actually sent this email. This is the 5-year quitversary of when I left employed practice. Now, I did, the slow process of putting an advance notice that I had to do in order to use up all my vacation days. But it's really got me thinking about the journey from that time to where I am now. And so we're going to talk about that today. Now, the reason why I want you to sort of get into that zone when we think about fantasy, because I don't know about you, for such a long time, I was so disgruntled. I was so unhappy. I just could not understand why everything felt so hard. It felt so hard to take care of patients, even though I was doing something that was incredibly meaningful, but there was just too much all the time, too much responsibility. I couldn't understand why the employers sort of treated us like we didn't matter. It didn't make sense to me. And I just couldn't understand what I had to do in order to earn their approval, in order to be considered good enough. Now, as I talk through that, I can see how my mindset was really a problem there. There are 100% problems within the system, but a lot of it was me. And by me, I mean a lot of it is us and how we've been trained to think about ourselves, about the systems that we work in, to some extent about the patients. So we're going to dive through some of all of that today. This isn't going to be one of those popcorn episodes because, spoiler alert, I did not flip the table, as I think so many of us would say in our fantasies, that we just, flip the table and storm out. But we're going to talk through what it looked like for me, and how we can think when we are kind of at that place of maybe deciding that we want to leave or move on, maybe quiet quit it in an actual helpful way, maybe full on quitting, and the work that lays on the other side of that. So I'm excited for our talk today. Let's talk a little bit about what happened. So I've told some of this story before. I don't remember what episode. It's not important, but it was probably a good 4 or 5 years before I actually left that I really felt I wanted out. I had trained within the group where I was practicing. I had been a patient there when I was born and when I was a young child. In many ways, it truly was my dream job. I dreamed of being a physician in this group and wanted to be like the family doc I had growing up. Now, this was child fantasy, right? I actually had no idea what he did. I just knew that when I was a young child and I had an ear infection or I was going for my checkup, there were stickers involved. My doctor was Dr. Abbott, but he jokingly called himself Dr. Rabbit when we were little kids. And it just seemed like a glorious place to be. Now, of course, this was many years later. This was, after my training, and this was after the medical system had pretty radically changed, probably many, many times over, right? From when I was a young kid in the 80s until the mid 2010s. But I found myself wanting to leave For a long time, I was constantly sort of looking online for what job opportunities were in my community. I knew we weren't going to move unless my husband needed to move because he's one of those crazy, sort of very specialty sort of people. I'm family med. I can get a job anywhere, right? But, I constantly was sort of looking at other positions, and everything I looked at just looked like more of the same. I had this sense of, well, I can change locations, but ultimately it's going to be the same. I'm going to be overworked wherever I go. I'm going to be ultimately unhappy wherever I go. Didn't really make much progress. And I absolutely felt obligated to stay. Sometimes that was obligated to continue taking care of my patients, especially as I saw many of my colleagues leave, right? And so patients were left without the doctors that they had loved. And, I took on probably more than my fair share of those because they had felt abandoned. I felt obligated to stay also because, at the time that this was happening, I was faculty in our residency. We were a satellite site. I felt very connected to the residents and the learners and the young attendings who stayed on with us after their residency. I didn't want to abandon them. That felt very wrong to me, especially because we had lost several of our founding faculty members. And so I was kind of the last of this original guard that had opened the residency satellite site. I don't know, 5 years. I felt just obligated and stuck. Part of that was, I'm sure, identity pieces, right? Which many of us can connect with, but I just couldn't see other options. And then the pandemic hit, right? And for me, I had young kids who were, one was pre-K at the time and one was in second grade. In the fall of 2020, they were starting kindergarten and third grade, which they did pretty much fully remote. So we were definitely steeped in that stress. In August 2020, I was so cooked by the work. And of course, I had the privilege of being an outpatient provider. We were still trying to do most of our work telehealth. We would have occasional visits where we'd be completely gowned and masked and, occasionally see people who need to be seen in person. But this was not the way that we wanted to be providing care, if you recall that time. But I had a medical appointment with somebody that I'd never met. It was somebody who was outside my system, who was in a private practice doing a vein surgery. I was there for a varicose vein consult, and she found out that I was a physician, and she sort of lit up, and she's like, "Oh, what do you do? And how are you?" And her excited, "How are you?" broke something in me. Now, I was not immune to crying. I was not immune to talking about my experience, but in that moment, I was just so done. I just burst into tears right in front of her. I think back, I can't remember the look on her face, but I just remember being in that moment and just feeling I had to get out. I had to do something else. I had to do anything else. Her immediate solution was, "You could come work here," right? She had her own practice. And that second thought that I could go work there, that's the point for me where I was like, clearly I have to go, because I could imagine something different. I could imagine some other reality where I would get to use my skills in a different place. I would get to take care of people in a clinic that really was truly beautiful. I haven't been there in a few years, but she had very carefully decorated the place. It was gorgeous. Something changed that day. And I'll tell you, that led me to a journey where I ended up getting board certified in obesity medicine, which I had been, kind of hemming and hawing about for multiple years. But that was absolutely helped by the pandemic because everything had gone online. I could do all the training online. I could do my test online. And so I made a plan. That plan involved completing the CME required to sit for the obesity medicine certification boards, which I took in February of 2021. It included making a plan with my husband that we were going to switch all of the benefits, which were primarily on my plan, over to his plan at open enrollment. It included some fantasizing about what I was going to do afterwards. And I had a plan. It didn't end up coming to pass, but I had a plan of how would I make things work on the other side. And so fast forward, February 2021, I took my obesity medicine certification boards. I found out that I had passed sometime in March, and I was ready. I was ready to send in my letter of resignation and I had it all drafted. I will tell you that I paused sending it because we found out that we had one final retention bonus check that was coming from the organization that had bought my organization. And I said, you know what? This resignation can wait a week. And that was our decision. No regrets on that one because it did not matter. But I'm also glad that before sending that email, which felt very incredibly consequential for me, kind of that, that dread of can I press go sort of feeling. I was so glad that my friends had let me know, just so you know, when you resign, do not expect that they are going to show regret. Do not expect that they will apologize for anything that has happened to you. Do not expect they will ask you to stay, to change your mind. And it's really important that we know those kinds of things before we do that, because I was very clear that I didn't need that. Of course, I wanted that, right? That's ego. That's normal. I wanted it. But I didn't need that because I had made a decision that was in alignment with what I believed that it was true for me in the moment. And frankly, I'd already started to do some work on changing the way that I thought and felt. And I was still clear on my decision. I could feel better. I could feel better. I'd started some coaching work, receiving coaching. I knew that I could feel better than the way that I had been feeling. I felt that shift mentally. And I didn't want to take it all the way and do the work to try and feel better where I was. I wanted to do the work. I wanted to change the way I thought and felt. And I did not want to stay. Now, I had referenced earlier quiet quitting. And what I mean here is this. There might be an instance where you decide that you are going to quit believing that you will get your self-worth from your employer, that you will be made to feel valuable by the work that you do just by showing up and working as hard as you can. We are trained to be people pleasers. We are trained to be hardworking professionals who put others first. That is literally our job that we do day in and day out. And many of us would like to pour all that we have into that with the belief that our employers will back us up on the other side. Now, typically, they will back us up when it comes to malpractice, right? If we have done due diligence and they've got their fancy lawyers behind us, they will back us up when something bad happens that we clearly were not acting maliciously, right? That's not what I'm talking about here. I am talking about, do they have your back when you're really struggling? Do they make intentional changes that help to support the lives of physicians and the people working in the healthcare space? Those are the things that we're looking for. We're looking for validation. We're looking to feel like we're doing a great job. And so often, because of the way that healthcare systems are set up, they benefit from you continuing to feel like you're not good enough. I'm sure that there are exceptions to that. I'm sure as well that there are many physicians who don't struggle with that. They don't go into medicine believing that medicine is where they're going to get their self-worth from. They don't believe that if they just keep hustling, that eventually something will feel better, right? There are those who are not people pleasers, that are not perfectionists, who are able to more emotionally disconnect, to not be ego-driven in that way. Ego-driven is not sound kind there, but so many of us, right, gain so much of our personal identity from being well-liked, being the one that's easy to talk to, being the doctor who's very popular. That's a whole different episode, and we could go there, but we're not going there today. But what I want to say is that I know that this is not true for all of us. But I also know that there is an incredibly large amount of physicians out there, and I'm going to say it's probably primarily female physicians who have this extra acculturation piece of how we've been raised socially as women, to put everyone else's needs above our own, and how we've been raised in medicine to feel like we're still earning our place, that we're still trying to be good enough to keep up with the men. right? There's still that bias there, and that comes from us. It comes from hierarchy within medicine for sure. It also comes from patients sometimes, right? Why do they feel they can ask more questions of female physicians? Female physicians get more questions from patients. In part, it's because our time is seen as less valuable. In part, it's because they feel more on par with us socially and better able to ask questions. Now, we could argue again about whether that's right or wrong, but there is some of that sort of worthiness piece that is baked into there. I would argue that it makes for better care. The better care that we provide is because we can have better conversations with our patients, that we can be more thorough, that we can give proper informed consent and really talk through pros and cons and what we know and what we don't know, regardless of your gender, regardless of the gender of the patient, right? And yet, patriarchy, hierarchy, right? Those are all part of the puzzle. What I want to say though is that some people's journey in the quitting might be that they are unsubscribing from some of these beliefs and doing the work without actually changing their job. Again, I shared that that was not for me. Maybe you're in a different situation than I was. Maybe you don't feel like you can leave, but you can recognize in my words as we talk about this, I am ready for a mindset change. I do want to think differently about this, right? That is possible, my friends, and it takes the same work, whether you're staying in a job or leaving a job, whether you're on your own or you're not. The work of unsubscribing from these beliefs, unsubscribing for the thought pattern is there for us no matter what we are going to do. After I had sent that email, I got a pretty dispassionate email back. It was not unkind, it was not rude, but it was from HR, right? Because I had sent the message, I believe, to my boss. I can't remember. I don't think I sent it to HR, but obviously he had forwarded it on. And HR, wrote this polite, but, pretty dispassionate response of, okay, well, we're sorry to hear that. And here's all the information you need to know from the human resources side. I gave a 3-month notice because, again, that's what was required in order for me to, be able to get paid back, I believe, all the PTO that I had accumulated that I hadn't used. I can't remember what all that looked like, right? But there was an intention behind that. Everything was set up. And from there, I started the process of emotionally detaching from what I was doing. Now, I'm happy to say that the journey between the resignation letter and actually leaving was not unpleasant. It was a pretty peaceful time. It was a pretty reflective time. And to be honest, I remember that time pretty fondly. My colleagues were sad, of course, and yet they were not rude. They were not mean. I had emotionally prepared for that because I don't know, we do, right? But they were incredibly hopeful and thoughtful and kind. My patients were sad, and yet they also, nearly all of them, respected that I was struggling and ready to move on to something else. And they wished me well. And that made a huge difference. I did, of course, have one patient. And of course, I can still remember who it was who thought I was being selfish. And I can now see, of course, how that's really about her. And she is allowed to have her opinion. It's totally valid. But at the time, of course, it felt very emotionally charged. And again, that is part of our own mindset. That is part of our own training and acculturation. And it's something to know. It's something to prepare for if you're going through this process, right? Because it is part of the story why people stay. When I talk to employed physicians who tell me that they're miserable, tell me that they'd like to go and do anything else, that they would like to maybe open their own practice, maybe they'd like to quit medicine altogether. The common fantasy of we're going to be a barista and, be able to just have an easier life. Part of what keeps us, right, is worry about our patients, worrying about what they're going to think of us, worrying about who's going to take care of them. These are very real concerns. We are caring humans. We come to this work and we end up in this place because we are caring humans. Again, There might be some physicians, this is not a big deal. They're not listening to the podcast. They are not you. They are not me. That's okay. But let me tell you what has happened since that time. So my last day was the end of June in 2021. I very smartly we planned a 2-week trip to go visit my mother-in-law because all of a sudden I didn't have to ask anyone permission to be out of town for 2 weeks. I'll tell you, that trip was a little bit fraught. I ended up filing for a scam, which I'm not proud of. My husband got into a huge fight with my sister-in-law, and the fallout has persisted. It was not the best trip, and I didn't sleep that well. And yet, my intention behind it was to show myself that I could take that longer trip, and that we would be fine, right? There was no school, the kids were out, there was no employer to be beholden. I didn't have to ask permission. And I knew that I needed to be distracted and not able to be in my house in my normal routine on that first day of not working after leaving my job. And I would highly recommend that path to anybody who's considering this. But more importantly, since that time, I have been able to explore and find so much of where I'm at today. I got coaching certification, which I intended to use in a different way than I've used it, and I have no regrets about that. I took some real time off. Somebody that I know had jokingly referred to a time between her jobs as a poorly paid sabbatical. This was definitely a poorly paid sabbatical. I was doing still some clinical work on a part-time basis, and it was independent contractor worker. It was very hit or miss, so there wasn't that much of it, and that was totally fine. It was totally fine. I'm grateful that I didn't financially need to work. My husband's salary and the way that we'd set things up was okay for us not working. I know that not everybody's in that bucket, but I am grateful. I'm grateful that that was part of my experience. Eventually, I landed in the clinic that I'm currently in as an independent contractor. And that was a real big switch for me because we're talking about leaving a large multi-specialty employed practice where people stayed for 30 years. When I started that journey, of course, that was not the path that people were on when I left, but stepping into a small private practice with no specialists, no nurses, a pretty skeletal staff that, was well functioning, but with the clear expectation that I would be starting to practice on my own, that I would be sort of plugging into their system, but I was responsible for growing my panel. I was responsible for how I wanted to schedule patients and limited to some extent because we, had a small number of exam rooms, but responsible for answering calls on my patients after hours. It was a very different setup. And I had no idea what I was walking into. But the ability to try things, the ability to explore things. This podcast was born about a year after I had resigned. I've participated in a lot of group coaching as a participant. I've led group coaching. I've led individual one-on-one coaching. Picked up expert witness work. I have been able to do an incredible amount of things and try and explore different things. And it's made me more of who I am today. It's made me more excited about opportunities that we can have with our degrees. It's given me so much more insight into the myriad possibilities that we can do personally and professionally. We are not the same when we go through this, but it starts with deciding that you are going to unsubscribe from the thoughts and beliefs that you have when you are thinking about who you are and what you owe in response to medicine, in response to your employer, to yourself. The journey of unlearning whatever thoughts and beliefs you carried about what you need to be doing, especially I think there's just no excuse. There's no decoupling. If you are in employed practice, if you are in modern medicine, the chances are extremely high that you've had some flavor of this experience where you're constantly under someone else's thumb in terms of what time you work, where you work, how often you work, and whether or not you can change the hours that you work, whether or not you can change the circumstances, whether you're in the OR, on labor and delivery, doing procedures, not doing procedures, seeing this type of patient or that type of patient, right? Those autonomy pieces are often not there when you're in employed practice. The ability to take vacations or paid leave or go to conferences, all of these things are generally dictated from the top down. And we're constantly fed this message that, well, if you really cared about patients, well, your patient needs something. And obviously that can only come from you, right? An incredibly high degree of responsibility. And yet without the autonomy to be able to make reasonable decisions for yourself. Now, we are privileged humans. Even the lowest paid specialties amongst us are still high paid specialties. Now, of course, we spent $1 billion to get the training that we did, most of us. But even those who make the least amongst us, we still make more than the average American. And so there's privilege there. We still experience privilege in terms of the degrees that we carry and the hierarchy that exists. Now, again, that looks a lot of different ways, and it's not all good news, but we have to accept that some of those things are true, and yet so many of us have such a low degree of control over these very basic things, like the time of day that we are best to see patients, the work environments that we serve in, who we have around us to help support the work that we need a team for, right? Again, when we can take paid time off or unpaid time off even. All of these things matter, and you would think that we had a higher degree of control over that than we have, but this is part of the broken healthcare system that understaffs, under-resources, and yes, sometimes that's driven completely by business decisions, but it's also driven by this for-profit system that literally only benefits when we see patients and drop a bill, right? Because that is how the money flows. This episode went a different direction, but that's okay because these stories matter. My story is one of thousands and thousands of stories out there of people who have stepped away from employed practice and decided that they were going to try something new. It matters when we think about how do we approach this thought, whether, again, we're leaving an employed position, whether we're jumping into something else, whether that's similar or dissimilar, whether we're deciding to leave clinical medicine altogether, even whether we're retiring. That is a difficult decision that people face of, when do I decide that I no longer do this work? All of these things are different challenges that we face. And what I hope you walk away with today is just seeing that deciding to leave does not have to be the end, and it does not have to be the scary circumstance that you might think it is. I'm not going to say that I didn't face fear, that I wasn't worried along the way, that I'm not going to say that the uncertainty was comfortable. Of course it wasn't. And yet for me, the balance of deciding that I would rather have the discomfort and the uncertainty than continue to stay in the discomfort that I knew well of being chronically overwhelmed and frustrated and resentful. I needed to break out of that. And the cost of that was the discomfort of uncertainty, of worrying whether or not I could do something different, of worrying about who I would be on the other side. These things matter, and these things keep us stuck. And if that resonates with you, if you've been contemplating a decision, whether, again, it's a quiet quitting pathway where you're just disconnecting from the thoughts that you owe everything to everyone, or whether that's actually leaving medicine, leaving your current practice, leaving employed practice, leaving the insurance world, right? There are many different ways that looks. But let's be clear we are leaving the certainty of the feelings that we've had that are driven by the thoughts and beliefs that we've carried with us for a long time. That's what we're leaving behind. And on the other side, we have the opportunity to think new thoughts, to create new beliefs, to have new experiences, whether that's in medicine or outside of medicine. That is what we can gain, but it will take first making the uncomfortable decision that I can't stay in this place. Again, this place might be a particular job. This place might be a particular relationship. This place might be just the belief that I have to continue to hustle for the approval from other people. My friends, I'm going to wrap up there. I had other things that I was going to talk about today, but you know what? We're going to talk about that next week. We're gonna expand the theme of lessons learned on the other side of my quitversary. Or actually, well, just quitting. I don't know. I'm having my quitversary right now. All right, my friends. Again, we're stopping there, but this is not the end of the journey. It's not for me and it's not for you. And I hope you'll come back next week. Until that time, my best to you and take care.
Well, that's our show for today. Thank you as always for listening. To learn more about my coaching programs, head to www.healthierforgood.com. And if you love this podcast, please drop us a review on iTunes or support the show by clicking the link in the show notes. Until next time, take care.